So welcome everyone, welcome to this latest episode in the data transformation series out of the Digital Transformation Lab in University College Cork, and I'm dialing in here from a cold December morning in Cork City, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Malcolm Hawker with us today. Malcolm and myself have been back and forth a bit trying to get this arranged, and I know we know people in common that have been advocating that we sit down and have a chat as well. Malcolm, I know I'm really excited by this session. In fact, I was telling people I was coming on and I've got literally pages of potential questions. People were excited by the opportunity of hearing your view on lots of different ideas. Malcolm, do you want to tell those that may not be as familiar with you about who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Yes, well, I'm Malcolm Hawker. I'm the head of data strategy for Profisee software, but I'm not here to sell. So that's the good news, and that's my role at Profisee. I was hired to be what we were calling an evangelist. We decided not to use that word in my title. I just think it's a little bit of a loaded kind of Silicon Valley title that is often misunderstood and often overly inflated. So we went with a title that we thought that our customers and the people that I work with day in and day out would kind of resonate with, which was head of data strategy. But really my job is to be an advocate for better data management, for better data governance, to be a trusted advisor in the data and analytics space for anybody that wants and needs a trusted advisor. We firmly believe at Profisee that a rising tide will lift all boats. And that if you're online, if you're on LinkedIn, or if you're looking for a podcast, or if you're listening to a podcast and you get some value from the things that I say or the insights that I share, or whatever through whatever channel or whatever medium I provide those insights, we believe that you'll remember me and you'll say, hey, there was that Canadian American chap that was pretty interesting and seemed to know what it was talking about. We think we have some needs here related to MDM or data governance or data quality. We should take a look at what he's selling. That's kind of our approach. So, I work in our marketing organization, so I guess I'm kind of marketing. I'm doing that right now. We're all marketing, but I come at my insights honestly. I have led an IT organization of a $2 billion publicly traded company here in the US. I've deployed MDM and data quality data management solutions. I've been a vendor working for a number of different companies, including Profisee, including a data provider called Dun & Bradstreet. I had a wonderful stint for nearly 3 years as an analyst with Gartner. So I'm honored to have my name appear in the last 3 Magic Quadrant documents for master data management and a number of the recent hype cycles from Gartner, plus a whole bunch of other research notes, as we call them at Gartner. So that was wonderful, and it was just such a blessing because in that 3-year span, I had the opportunity to speak to 1,500 data leaders. I pulled a report on my last day at Gartner. Gartner calls them inquiries, where Gartner clients call up analysts and ask them difficult questions about governance or quality or data strategy. And I had the privilege of doing that 1,500 times. I was blown away when I pulled the numbers. And that's companies. And often on the phone, there was 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 people. So my guess is about 2,000 people over the last few years about what's working, about what's not working, what their challenges are, offering kind of my insights, having kind of failed miserably at a number of these things over the years. Failure can be a wonderful learning tool, as difficult as it is to encounter. I certainly learned that the hard way when I was running an IT organization about how not to do governance, about how not to do MDM. But my time at Gartner was a fantastic time, and now. The best part about my job now is that when I was with Gartner, I was behind a paywall. I was metered. Access to me was tightly controlled for very obvious reasons. People were paying a lot of money to hear what I had to say. But now I'm outside that paywall, and so I can have conversations with brilliant people like yourself, Patty, and others, and share what I know in a whole multitude of channels that I didn't have access to when I was at Gartner. When I was at Gartner, I was writing research and I was having client inquiries. But beyond that, the interactions were limited because, again, I was metered. But now I'm not. And I'm sharing what I know to anybody who wants to listen.
And it's fantastic as well, Malcolm, to see that sort of explosion in your activity, on LinkedIn and YouTube, etc. And for anyone watching it, I'd really recommend to dial into Malcolm on those channels, and I'm sure there's others, and we'll come back to that afterwards. Malcolm, you're after opening a door to me now, and I'm not going to allow you to shut it. What did you learn from these 1,500 companies about what's really on their minds? What are the challenges they're facing?
Well, there's some usual suspects that keep coming around and around and around. The biggest one is that as kind of a data community, we are really, really challenged with figuring out how to quantify in dollars or pounds or euros, or pick your currency, but in real ways, to quantify how data is driving business outcomes and how data is driving business benefits. I would be called on a near daily basis with people saying, hey, well, I'm having trouble getting stakeholder engagement. I'm having trouble getting organizations to commit resources to provide data stewardship. We're standing up a data governance committee, but nobody comes to the meetings. And the list here of side effects of this is so long. I could keep talking for hours of the side effects of the business not seeing the value of investments in governance or data management. And I would have those questions every day at Gartner. And then I would turn around and ask, he's like, okay, well, have you done any sort of business case for your governance initiative? Do you know what the ROI is going to be? And the answer was always no. Or the answer was, well, of course we have. We've modeled out that we believe that our data, that we will reduce our duplicate rate, or we will reduce the number of null fields that we have in our databases, or that we will have more consistent data. And that was maybe about 20 to 30% of the time. 60 to 70% of the time, the answer was no. We have no way of benchmarking, the value of our data, the value of investments in data. 20 to 30% of the time, it was, yeah, of course we do. But what was articulated back was through the lens of IT measures, data management measures, data quality measures that the business doesn't care about, right? Sadly, this is one of the hard truths that I had to learn when I was leading teams doing this stuff, which is the business doesn't care about data quality. The business cares about what they need to do for a living. They need to care about delivering customer experiences, or shipping goods, or making goods. They don't, and as long as the data doesn't truly and completely get in the way, meaning stopping the factory floor or stopping the phones from ringing in the call center, they're going to do their business. They're going to figure out ways around it. So that was like the key learning at Gartner, is that we really, really, really need to figure out ways to quantify, how investments in data are driving real outcomes. And what I mean by that is increased revenue, reduce cost, and reduce risk on the business side. On the business side, we can build business cases that say we'll reduce the cost of data management, right? We will reduce our database costs, or our compute costs, or storage costs. Those are okay. Those are good things, but that's only really half the way there, right? If you can quantify what better data management will do for IT, that's good. That is good. But really, you need to take the next step and go beyond that and say, okay, what does that mean to sales? What does that mean to your core business? Maybe you make products. Maybe you're in the business of it doesn't matter what the business is, but whatever the KPIs are from the business side of the house, not the IT side of the house. So that was kind of key learning, number one. Number two is loosely tied to that, but at a high level, we really have a significant challenge when it comes to building our overall data and analytics governance and data management maturity levels. We're just really struggling there, across the board. So whether that is knowledge gaps, whether that is just resource gaps, we have some real challenges. And what's happening and what I'm seeing is because of underinvestment in data management and underinvestment in data quality and all of those things, because you can't quantify to the business how it's going to help. Underinvestment is this kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning our maturity levels, our overall kind of excellence from a data operations perspective is not really growing. It's not keeping pace with what the business is doing. The business is increasingly digitally transforming. The business is accelerating. The business is finding and building new operating models to adapt to everything that's happening in our world. Post-pandemic, supply chain disruptions, war in Europe, you name it. The business is figuring out ways to adapt, and they're moving faster, and they are overcoming these challenges. Meanwhile, underinvestments in data, we're falling behind. we're falling behind. And what this also creates is that this interesting kind of schism that I see is growing between academic concepts in the data management world and practical, what's really actually happening in the data management world. I'll give you an example. Most of what you will hear now these days in my world from anybody who is kind of an industry expert or an analyst. I heard it at a conference I was at yesterday in Washington, D.C. People will say, well, single version of the truth is dead. That's long gone, right? Now we can be more adaptive and we can have multiple versions of the truth, and marketing can be right and finance can be right and logistics can be right and everybody can live happily ever after. Well, I agree with that. That sounds fantastic. That's exactly what we need. But from practical terms, companies are still struggling with doing that just once in one functional swim lane, in one functional group of having a single version of the truth, just for marketing or for logistics or for finance. So I see this kind of this schism growing between people who are out there in the industry talking about data mesh and data fabric and whatever. I mean, insert shining name here. And those things are great. Don't get me wrong. But meanwhile, back in the engine room, the maturity levels needed to adopt a data fabric architecture or a data mesh architecture the gap there is just way too big. Companies won't do it. To have what a data mesh would call federated computational governance. To get to that point, separate conversation of what that actually means. It's complex. Trust me, it's complex, because when you have domain centricity and domains doing basically whatever they want to do at some levels of the organization, at higher levels of the organization, those differences need to be resolved somehow. Because if the CEO asks, how many customers do you have? There can only be one answer. The answer can't be, well, what domain? Through what lens? Through the customer lens, or through what lens, or through what operational lens? And the mesh would say, okay, well, there's this hand wavy thing that needs to happen called federated computational governance, and that will fix all of that. Okay, that sounds great. Let's do that. Meanwhile, you've got people doing data management who are struggling just to have one version of the truth. So I could literally talk for hours here, but the second issue here, this growing divide between academic approaches to data management and what's actually happening in most companies, is one of the biggest reasons why I left Gartner. Because what I saw was too much focus on these academic things and not enough focus on the kind of basic blocking and tackling, using an American football term. I think you use blocking and tackling in European football. Anyway, yeah. Too much focus on some of the academic stuff and not enough focus on some of the basic stuff, and figuring out ways to rise that tide, to lift that tide, and make us all better at data management. So those are a couple of things that I saw. There's others, way too much focus on technology, not enough focus on people and process, of course. Those are some of the big things. I could literally talk for hours about it.
Yeah. And there's actually even enough here to keep us going for a week, I would say, Malcolm, which is fantastic. And just maybe picking at the bones of some of what you're saying there, and I think it's really, really fascinating. You're definitely talking about the need for that line of sight back to value, that we need to be, focused on value. And I'm intrigued by this idea, though, that the business is now moving faster, and needing to move faster than maybe some of our data setups in organizations. Why is that? How have we got to that stage, Malcolm?
It's a really good question. One of the short answers is, well, to me, it always comes back to issue number one, right? Which is, if you can't justify how investments in data are linked to that acceleration, or linked to that digital transformation, or linked to that supply chain optimization, if you can't do it, then you're going to be at the table kind of begging for the table scraps, right? And it will default to the mean from a data management perspective, meaning we'll do the minimum to make sure that we don't get sued or break the law, right? But to do the really, really, really fun stuff, what I saw, and to do the transformational stuff needed on the data side, needs prolonged investment, right? Not within a single budget cycle, but we're talking 3, 4, 5 year prolonged investment in those things. So data leaders need to be showing value. They need to be moving the needle. They need to be agile. They need to be delivering value over and over and over and over again to deserve as it were, for lack of a better word, or to justify, that's a better word, to justify prolonged investment in data management. Well, what we see instead is these yo-yos seesaw back and forth. You'll get a new CIO or a new CEO that says, data's the new oil. Data's going to save the world. Let's invest in data. And they'll do it for one budget cycle. And then month 18 will come along and they'll take a look at it and they'll say, wait a minute, what have we actually done? Can you prove it to me? And then the funding goes away. So there's this ebbing and flowing of funding and commitment to data related issues. Meanwhile, on the business side of the house, a lot of these programs, 3, 5, 6-year programs, I'm seeing this certainly from a digital transformation perspective, continue to get funding, continued presence and continued focus on supply chain optimization, improving the customer experience. Meanwhile, the data organization is doing the seesawing back and forth, trying to figure out, oh, okay, well, how do we actually execute on this strategy? How do we actually deliver value? And this is another reason why CDO tenures are so short, right? CDO tenures, the tenures of a chief data officer, are half of the tenure of a CIO. Yes, it's an emerging competency, and yes, we're still learning how to be CDOs, but that's a big reason, is because honestly, they're failing to deliver value, or if they are delivering value, they can't prove it.
Yeah, and I think that, and it reminds me as well, I think it was even Scott Taylor, who both of us know, and you know Scott really well, Malcolm, you know, talking about nearly a jealousy now within data, that digital transformation, sometimes led by maybe even the marketing area or elsewhere, but getting all this funding, and then the data community nearly seeing itself being starved of funding. What's going on? Why aren't we able to sell the value of what we're doing, Malcolm? Is it a failure in capability? Is it a failure in, I don't know, what it is? I'll leave you maybe explore it.
I think a lot of it comes down to leadership. And I see CDOs and CIOs who are focused on data being kind of one of two types of personalities or personas, right? They're operators or they're strategic people, right? They're focused on strategy and conceptual things, and can speak well in a boardroom, and who can go play golf with the CEO and maintain relationships within the C-suite, and can do the selling, and who can be the kind of charismatic leader of a data organization. Those are kind of the strategic types. And then there's the operational types, who are heads down, who know the data, who know SQL, who know the difference between Kafka and APIs. Those folks tend to be focused on bottoms up type initiatives, right? Where they go do a data catalog, or they'll profile everything, or they'll work on a data governance framework, or they'll say, well, we have to do all these things as key dependencies before we can start really kind of moving the needle. So I'll go hire insert consultant name here, it doesn't matter what consultant. So, and we'll do a discovery initiative, and we'll do a maturity assessment. We'll do this bottoms up stuff. Meanwhile, the strategic types are starting from the kind of top down and saying, okay, well, here's all the things we need to do. When in reality, what you need is both. You need both. It can't be an either or. It has to be a both. And what that means is that effective CDOs are unicorns, right? They are really they're unicorns out there in the corporate world, and that translates into what I'm calling a lack of leadership. And that's not an indictment of individuals or individual personalities. There have been unbelievable, strategic thinkers who have literally changed our world, the Steve Jobs and Elon Musks of the world. And those people are incredibly important and are great at what they do. And then there's operators that are doing the same thing day in and day out, keeping the factory floors running and keeping our global supply chains moving. But when it comes to data, you need somebody who can do both. And there's not a lot of people out there who can do both. And that translates into companies really struggling to do both, the kind of the bottoms up and the top down, that are needed to move the needle. You need to be agile. You need to carve things into small chunks. You need to know some of the minutia here. You really do, to be an effective CDO. I'm not saying you need to write SQL statements, right? But you do need to at least kind of know the data estate. You need to know how these pieces fit together. You need to know the difference between data quality and MDM, at least from a capabilities perspective, while you also need to know the stuff at the top. You need to have informed conversations with CDOs. You need to know why data is important to digital transformation. So I think that's the short answer to the question, which is it really, I think it comes down to effective leadership. Now, some of those shortcomings for leadership can be made up within CIO or CEO roles who are kind of data friendly, right? And who know the importance here. But it just really, it all boils down to, do you have the leadership to make sure that you can get the funding for a prolonged programmatic approach to solving these things, right? While at the same time doing kind of some very, very small and very kind of taking more agile approaches to incrementally move the needle and doing both at the same time. It's a unique skill set.
It is unique, and it's interesting, Malcolm, because I think on a previous version of this episode of this show, we were also talking about, some people referring to it as maybe the defensive type CDO versus the more offensive. But then the argument was we need both. It isn't just one or the other. It's not just about keeping the lights on. It's not about figuring out what we need to do next. It's actually both, which I think is a really nicely put point. Malcolm, I was telling someone I was coming on with you, and they said you must ask Malcolm about the following, that he refers to data and seeing data and being an advocate for data as a product.
Yes.
Can you shine a light on that for us?
Oh, very much so. So in my kind of professional journey, I've been doing what I'm doing for more than 30 years, which sounds crazy to say, but the gray hair here is earned. My first 15 years was in product management. I was a product leader. I was the chief product officer for a small software company. I was a senior director, VP of product management. I've led product management teams. I've hired product managers. Some of the most effective people that I've ever worked with in my career were really, really good product managers. So I've always looked at data as a product. As a matter of fact, in some of my early career progression where I was working, they viewed data as a product. We had product managers working within data and analytics. This was 25 years ago. I was working for a little internet startup called America Online, AOL. And we had kind of product managers within the data and analytics group. We had product managers who were responsible for BI and analytics. I had managed I was a product manager of a reporting tool, right, that reported for advertising at AOL. So I had kind of already been pre-programmed to think that data and data management solutions and data management software, like data quality software, governance software, you name it, was a product, right? And now in my last 15 years being in this world, I've always kind of approached things that way. Now there is this new shiny object out there saying, oh, data is a product, and I'm all for it. So, sign me up. I think it can only do good things, because if you kind of think about what product managers do, right, their entire role, their reason for being is to interpret and understand at an intimate level the needs of customers. That's what product managers, that's job number one of a product manager. Job number two then is to start to translate those needs into things that are actionable from a technology perspective, right? Writing requirements, defining user stories, writing the epics that will go into the backlog to deliver against whatever those customer requirements are. And by the way, also, I would argue a good product manager would be doing all of these things and defining requirements and building out roadmaps and building out product roadmaps and product strategies, aka data strategies. They would be doing it in a way that was all rooted around ROI. There isn't a product manager on the planet that would ever recommend that we build a Lamborghini and sell it to first-time car buyers, because they could never afford it, right? So the cost and the ROI and pricing here needs to be an attribute of it. And yes, I think we could even apply pricing models internally if our customer is internal. Most companies work on some sort of budgeting and budget allocation where IT has allocated money back from wherever, from marketing, from finance, from any of the other kind of the shared, the cross-functional groups into IT to support the internal needs. So why couldn't we be doing that in the data and analytics world? We largely are. Most IT leaders are allocated budget. It's just they don't put any prices on it. They do costing, but those costs are pricing, the prices. So we could easily be taking kind of the exact same approach in the data management world and really becoming like product managers and doing everything that a product manager would do, including competitive analysis. Right. So, are there alternatives outside of what we're building? This would fall into kind of a build versus buy, but are there alternatives out there that are doing things better than we're doing? Right. Maybe we should be going and buying this instead of trying to build it just from scratch. A big part of a product manager job as well is what I call go-to-market, GTM. This includes things like user training. This includes things like branding, positioning, product marketing. Sometimes product marketing and product management are together, depends on the size of the company. The bigger the company, often they tend to be split, but product marketing gets into things like branding and positioning and messaging. I know that you are friends with Alan Duncan, as I am as well. Alan's a Gartner analyst who is very passionate about what he calls data literacy. I happen to think that data literacy is a reflection of a failure of data management professionals. And I think that the notion of data literacy is backwards. Meaning, do we need to train users? Of course we do. Do the users need to know how to press the button on the BI tool or the analytics tool in order to get what they need? Of course they do, right? But the notion of data literacy to me is a little misguided, because let's say I was a product manager and I made a widget, right? It was this widget, and I was the product manager. And I did the requirements. I did everything that I would need to do. I would interface with technology. I would define the roadmap. I'd execute against the roadmap, and then we deliver the widget to the market. Pardon me. And it's a dismal failure, right? Nobody buys the widget. People start calling and contacting customer support left, right, and center. Our warranty claims go through the roof, right? It's not working out, right? The customers aren't getting value from the widget. They don't really like the widget, and they started to go buy widgets from somebody else. Would we say that that was a function of a failure of widget literacy? Nope, we wouldn't. We would not say that. We wouldn't say that that was that our customers needed to be more widget literate. We'd never say that.
Yeah,
we'd never say it.
No, and I think,
yeah, go ahead.
And I think it's really interesting, Malcolm, because I think you're right. I think we're building out data applications, data architecture. We're not seeing the return, so there must be something in the gap between, and we say that's data literacy.
Well, right, and I think it is, but that's not the user's fault. That's our fault. And when we put this and we define this gap through the lens of a user problem and not a product management problem and not a product, it's a, for lack of a better phrase, kind of blaming the victim, right here, which is the user. We failed to meet the user needs. The products are too difficult to use. They don't deliver the value, or I'm struggling to use the interface. Now, don't get me wrong, we need to train the users. They need to be up to speed on how to use the tools. But I would argue that if we are to become honestly and truly kind of product driven, data as a product, the implementation of data or as product management as a discipline into data management, if we do that, then I would argue that the notion of data literacy should pivot. And the pivot should be more about, yes, I'll say it, business literacy and process literacy and user experience with our products, where we are still training, we are still imparting the information that they need in order to get value out of the products that we're training. But if there's a problem, if the users aren't getting value, if the users are having a hard time using what we're providing, or they don't understand what we're providing, or it doesn't solve the problem, or if it doesn't facilitate making the decision they need to make, then that's our fault. It's not theirs, it's ours.
Yeah, and I think it's I really like the idea actually of the fact that if you start looking at it as data as a product, you nearly pivot the way you think about data, and you maybe naturally move towards a more value-driven, disciplined approach to working with data. And I think seeing this as in terms of value propositions, value chains, use cases, like you say, user stories. I think that's really, really interesting. And the other thing, and you've mentioned it already, Malcolm. I know when I ask people to know what you know Malcolm for, and they say, "Oh, it's the master data management guy, isn't it? It's the MDM guy." And it's really interesting, because I think people do see you as that. I suppose sometimes I wonder, what do people see MDM as? Do they see it as a discipline? Do they see it as software? What do they see it as? How do you think people do see you and what you talk about, Malcolm?
It's a good question. I do want to just tie off on the mention to Alan, because Alan is one of the smartest people that I've ever met, and I love every minute I spend talking with him. We're ex-peers from Gartner, but I raised him because he's a big advocate of data literacy within Gartner, and he's writing a lot of the research there. I actually cornered him in Orlando at the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit this September, and we got into a lively chat about data literacy, and basically what I said, I thought it should go away, which is, and he had some very, very interesting words to share back with me. So it's good, but that debate is really, really good. And I just wanted to let it be known that if you get a chance ever to talk to Alan Duncan, you should most certainly take it. Yeah. How are people viewing me and what I do? Well, yeah, I'm kind of the MDM guy. My name is on 3 MDM Magic Quadrants. It's my kernel with a K, right? It's my home base. And I'm okay with that. I'm proud with that. I think master data management is critical, and it is both a noun and a verb, right? It is both a program. It's a discipline. It's a way of managing data, but it's also a software package. So can you do MDM without software? Absolutely. MDM software is just really all about scale. It's automation and scale. It's having a single place to configure and manage complex business rules that at a certain point you really just can't do in Excel spreadsheets anymore. VLOOKUP can only take you so far when it comes to entity resolution at scale, meaning matching at scale. But if you're a relatively small company, do you need to go spend millions of dollars on MDM software? No, you don't. You can implement MDM as a discipline, right? And MDM as a discipline basically says that not all data is created equally. And this passes the smell test immediately, right? For anybody that I'm talking to, we'll say, okay, well, of course, not all data is created equally, right? And the way that we used to describe this at Gartner, which I think is an apt metaphor, is just a 3-ring Venn diagram. 3 circles, Venn diagram, and they overlap. In the middle, that's your master data. That's data that is widely shared. We were at this conference in DC with about 400 people sitting in a boardroom, and they were having a discussion. There was a keynote panel discussion. The topic of the panel was managing your most critical data. And I was starting to get a little bit antsy because I was sitting there and I was like, well, critical data is master data, but they weren't saying master data. And I was like sitting there, say it, it's master data, it's master. And they didn't. They got their 45-minute panel conversation with a number of people that I know very well, by the way. They're friends of mine, including Bob Seiner, John Moran, a few others. And they got through the conversation and said, well, is there any questions? And somebody in the audience, thank goodness, said, well, what's the difference between master data and critical data? And bless her heart for doing that. And then the person who answered is a friend of mine who's been a guest on my podcast, John Brand. He said, well, critical data is not master data. These are 2 different things. Because to quote Malcolm Hawker, this is what he's saying in the panel. He says, to quote Malcolm Hawker, master data is shared data. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. Master data is the data that is shared widely across your organization that needs consistent definition, consistent structure, consistent quality standards, right? So it is, my friend Scott Taylor would say, it's the nouns that run the business. Asset, person, location, customer, employee, supplier, vendor. That's the data in the middle of that Venn diagram. It is used everywhere. It's used widely across the organization, and it needs special care and handling, and it needs special governance policies and procedures applied to it that are not relevant to other data elements. So I guess from a kind of a hair-splitty perspective, you could have data that you called critical. I really don't know what that is, but you could call it critical, that only lived and breathed in one application, one table, one system, that was only used by one group. I suppose it would be critical to that group, right? Like, let's just say some field in a CRM that is never used anywhere else, just lives and breathes in CRM, it only exists there. I suppose you could say that that's critical, but I would question the criticality of it if it wasn't used cross-functionally.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And to be somewhat provocative, but also remembering a discussion I had during the week, Malcolm, and I'm going to word it in a more provocative way. and it was essentially saying, when and why did we feel the need to call good data governance and good data management master data management?
So this, to me, this starts to get into kind of the what I was calling earlier, this split between kind of academic concepts in the data world and what actually happens in real practice within companies. And we live in a world, in the data management world, that really doesn't change that much. Sorry, it just doesn't. However, we live in a world that has vendors and that has analysts and who have other players, stakeholders in that ecosystem that need to show innovation, that need to innovate, that need to come up with new ideas. Because if you weren't innovating, if you were, let's just say, a Gartner analyst, which I was, if you're not innovating, right, and you're basically saying just the same thing over and over and over again, year after year after year after year after year, and you're not really innovating there, people aren't going to subscribe as much. There's a motivation that is hardwired into the kind of the recurring subscription business model, which is exactly what Gartner is and every other analyst firm. There's an incentive built into that operating model to constantly innovate and to constantly make something that is new, even if it isn't really that new. That's the dirty secret, right?
That's
Which
right.
is like, it's really not that new, but in order to keep driving eyeballs or to get people to buy or to upgrade, same is true in the vendor world. Same is true in the vendor world, right? Like, yes, we're evolving. There's AI, there's ML, there's augmented data management, there's graph, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. So there is innovation happening, don't get me wrong. But the core stuff here, like governance, these concepts have not changed in 20 years. They just haven't changed in 20 years. But you have these forces in the market that need to show innovation. So what ends up happening is words will be tweaked. New concepts like data observability. What in the world does that mean? I have no idea. And I'm an analyst. Maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am, but I don't know what it means, at least insofar as how is it different than anything we've ever been doing. Now, I'm sure there's vendors out there that are probably want to punch their screen because who is this guy? Say with data observability, of course, it's this solution and this solution, and it does things that nobody's ever done before, and it's wonderful and it adds value. Okay, that may be true. But in our industry, there are plenty of motivations to be constantly changing names. I actually made a post on LinkedIn. I called it the cement, and I did a flow chart. And I called it the semantic pedanticism feedback loop.
Yeah. It sounds great.
And it was a riff, by the way. I didn't come up with the term semantic pedanticism. That was Doug Laney, his friend of mine, Doug Laney, one of the smartest people that you'll ever want to talk to when it comes to data and value and the business value of data. Has written a number of different books about it. New York Times bestselling author, smart dude. He used this phrase once, semantic pedanticism. I was like, oh, Doug, you nailed it. That's it. That's it. And then I was like, my addition to that body of knowledge was making this pithy little graph and this that I posted on LinkedIn. But Patty, I see it to be true, right? Which is we'll come up with new names and they're really not new. They're really not different, but they make us look smart. They make our customers want to buy more from us because it looks new and it looks different, and it may be slightly, but is it really that different? I'm not so sure. So data management, data versus information, right? Like that's a good one. Data management versus data governance. Well, the hair split there, the correct academic distinction there is data governance is inherently policies and procedures, and data management is the execution and implementation of solutions to solve for those policies and procedures. One is writing down policies and defining policies, and the other is executing them. That's the difference between data governance and data management technically. But you get my point. There's a lot of motivation hopefully in our market where people create new names for old stuff all the time that drives me nuts.
Yeah, and I appreciate the honesty as well, Malcolm, in the reply. Malcolm, I was again, I watch your stuff a lot, and I've stuff that I want to bring up in this, and I'm also conscious of time.
Yeah,
I've heard you say maybe separately, to know that you said the future of it, and I'm reading it here, the future of MDM is bright, which we'd expect you maybe to say. But I also
Yes.
have heard you saying that its uptake appears quite sluggish.
Always has been.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's again? Maybe it's repeating some of the answers to previous questions. Why is it sluggish when it's core to data governance, data management,
Core.
etc.?
Yeah. So it's not going away. And the reason why it's not going away is because we will never, ever get to a point where all data is created equally. There is some data that needs different rules and different governance because it is inherently cross-functional, right? So we can say all we want about kind of adaptive forms of governance that acknowledge that the marketer's view of the world is different than the accountant's view of the world. Absolutely true, right? That's fantastic. And we can be domain driven and do whatever we want in those realms. But if you go up the organization to a cross-functional level and ultimately to an enterprise-wide level, those differences need to go away. That's MDM. And as long as those differences are inherently there, and they will always be there because they functionally need to be there because of functional kind of specification and being functionally driven, MDM's not going away. Why is the uptake slow? It's been slow. It's been kind of, it's the tortoise, right? It's the 6 to 7 to 8 to 9% growth as a market, right? Gartner does a market share analysis pretty much every year. There are some, including Profisee and others that are growing at faster rates by kind of exploiting some of the weaknesses in the MDM market that have historically been there, like time to value, complexity, right? And all MDM is complex and kind of really focusing and doubling down on more what we would call analytical forms of MDM. But I think writ large, I think MDM is slow and it is not meteoric on the uptake because it's just not sexy. It's just not. It is meat and potatoes data management that is difficult. It's not only is it not sexy, it can be quite difficult, particularly when you're talking about operational MDM, because you inevitably get into the business of trying to, I don't want to say enforce, but at the very least, heavily influence business process change. Right? If you create a single version of the truth, or even a context-centric version of the truth, or something, let's just call it truthful, that you want a business process to use in whatever that process is, in delivering a customer experience or delivering a finished product or whatever it is, if that process is to consume that data, chances are pretty good that the process needs to change. And that is hard. That is hard because then you're asking data leaders who, for the most part, were pretty introverted types that just kind of want to stay in the engine room, and we're fine being in the engine room. And now you're asking me to go sit down with people who are talking, using a different language than I'm using, entirely don't even speak my language. They're talking about a process that I really don't understand that well. I probably should understand it better, but I don't understand it that well. And I'm basically telling them they're going to need to change that, because they're going to need to use this more kind of cross-functional version of a customer or a product or a location, and that's hard for a lot of data leaders. So it's not very sexy. It can be very, very difficult. It can be very time-consuming, and data leaders, because of the lack of that leadership that I was talking about earlier, data leaders get just caught up in the shiny object, right? And it's like, oh man, it is really hard to execute on a cross-functionally or enterprise-wide data strategy. That's hard, man. That is really, really hard. And then things come along like the data mesh and says, "Oh, you don't have to. Don't worry about it. You can be completely decentralized. You can manage your data at a domain level. As a matter of fact, it's a best practice." And the person kind of driving the mesh narrative, Zhamak, unbelievably intelligent, a person. Again, another person we should be listening to as data leaders, would say, even she would say, the data mesh is a reaction to over-centralization of data. Those are, I'm paraphrasing her, but that's what she would say, is that it was a reaction to too many failed attempts to centralize data management. Absolutely true. I see those failed attempts all the time. But what we really need to get to, again, is both. It's not centralization or decentralization. It's a little bit of both. And MDM requires centralization at least at a policy level, not necessarily at a kind of an operational level, but at least at a policy level, things like how do we define customers, suppliers, vendors, assets, location. If you're talking cross-functional, if you're talking data sharing, which is really what MDM enables, data sharing, then you're talking cross-functional, and those rules get hard because there's a need for a lot of people to be sitting at the table to collaborate on what those rules should be. So we get caught up in these shiny objects, and then the pendulum shifts, and it's like, aha, let's run over here to the data mesh because I no longer have to worry about centralized data management, and man, that was a pain anyway. Yeah, or let's run over, I saw this with big data. I saw this 15 years ago with big data. It's like, Hadoop. It's going to make everything easier. It's going to solve all the problems. We'll just go deploy some Hadoop clusters.
Turn the key and everything will be fine.
Well, it'll be fantastic. It'll be done. We just get so caught up in these new shiny things, and we race towards them. And maybe we lose our jobs, or maybe we don't deliver value, or whatever it is, and then we do it all over again and over again. So I think there's MDM is very much the tortoise when it comes to the tortoise and hare metaphor. It's not going away. We need to figure this stuff out. Yes, some of the shiny objects can deliver a lot of value. I think the data fabric could be absolutely positively transformational. Absolutely. I think some of the new technologies related to AI and ML in the data management space, absolutely transformational. Doesn't mean we need to be putting all of our money there and all of our attention there. We need to be focused on some of the basics that we're just not focused enough on.
Yeah, no, and I agree completely. And also, I'm not sure we'll ever be able to digitally transform if we don't, I suppose, consider some of this data governance, data management stuff. And MDM has definitely a role within that. I really want to finish or start to close based on an article you wrote, Malcolm, and I think we were swapping stuff maybe a bit back and forth, where you referred to blockchain and what we can learn from blockchain, maybe in terms of governance, centralization, maybe even decentralization. Can you just even tell us, even if it's only a minute or two, a bit of what you were talking about?
You're asking for brevity, Patty. I used to get paid by the word when I was at Gartner, so.
And I'd say we could keep this going for 3 hours.
Well, so this conference in Washington that I was at, I gave a presentation on the pithy kind of title is how blockchain will save data governance, and I'd invite any of the listeners to just Google Forbes Hawker blockchain, and it'll come right up at the top. There's an article that I wrote for Forbes about how I think blockchain can save data governance. Yes, it's a little clickbaity, but there's something there, and really. I use the word blockchain because I think as an enabling technology, it is the technology that we need. But really, the story here, folks, the story is about data sharing. It's about data sharing. It is about creating a shared data asset. Not all data, not your competitive data, not the data that makes you different than your competitors, that it drives competitive advantage. But there's a lot of data in our estates, a lot, that company A is managing, company B, company C, company D, company E, they're all managing, and they're all managing it the same way, and it all looks pretty much the exact same, and all of it you can find in Google, right? So if I can go into Google and look up, Verizon and get information about Verizon, and it's good enough for my company and good enough for all these other companies, why do we continue to manage that data individually as silos? So if you think about MDM, what is MDM? MDM is designed to break silos that exist within companies. But if you view a company as a silo, then what would you need to do to break silos that exist across companies, to support cross-company uses of certain shared master and reference data? Reference data is a classic example here. Weights, dimensions, measures. Historically, we've done this through what are called data consortiums. And the fact that I can go to a grocery store and scan a good and have it go beep and have the information that comes up in the cash register the same all the time, that's a data consortium. That is a data sharing agreement between companies that are participating in product-related data. I would argue we can do the exact same thing in a peer-to-peer way and kind of disambiguate a lot of the intermediaries that are today providing kind of shared master data. MDM of MDMs, running on blockchain, shared data, shared governance, where we could drive significant cost and efficiency savings using that approach to data management.
Yeah, and what really intrigued me as well, Malcolm, about what you're saying, like obviously blockchain has an incentive model built in,
Yes.
hence the crypto. But you were also, I think, suggesting like, that are alluding at least to, is there a way of incentivizing new behaviors when it comes to data, using
Indeed.
maybe being inspired by that. So I really like that part as well.
Yeah.
And Malcolm, we've been, as I say, I don't know how long we've been going now, but I just want to finish out by asking you a very quick question. I know you've mentioned names already. You've mentioned Alan Duncan, who's been on this series already. Who else do you look up to? And really, you mentioned Doug Laney as well. You really respect within the industry.
Oh boy, the list here is certainly long. Doug Laney, I already mentioned him for sure. Alan Duncan, just about anybody at Gartner. These are really, really smart folks. Mark Beyer, another Gartner analyst who is kind of, I'll call him the father, let's call him the father of the data fabric. If you want to know about the data fabric and why it exists and how to maybe implement it against one, Mark Beyer is one of the smartest human beings I think I've ever met. Now, sometimes it can be difficult having a conversation with Mark because he is so smart, and he's an analyst like me, so he's kind of prone to metaphor, and so sometimes it's tough to keep up with the metaphors. But he's most certainly another one. I mean, I would, I'd mentioned Scott Taylor, a dear friend of mine, and there are so many other people that I follow on LinkedIn that I'm friends with on LinkedIn. You had mentioned Bill Schmarzo, wow, super smart. Samir Sharma, again, super smart when it comes to things like data strategies. I was just in Washington with a friend of mine, Laura Madsden, who wrote a book recently called Disrupting Data Governance, where the first line of the book is, "I hate data governance." And she wrote a book about it. Like that's somebody after my heart, right? Where the first line of a data governance book is, "I hate data governance." The list here is so long. There's so many resources out there.
Yeah. And it's an unfair question as well in a way when there are so many.
Who's your favorite kid? Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's an unfair. Malcolm, the most important thing is though, where can people find more of you and what you're talking about? Where do you hang out?
LinkedIn. There are 3 Malcolm Hawkers on the planet. Especially if you spell Malcolm the right way, kind of the traditional Scottish spelling with another L, Malcolm. But yes, please come find me on LinkedIn. We have a lot of resources available through Profisee.com as well, but a great starting point is LinkedIn. I'm posting almost every day, and I'm building a community of like-minded people who need information on data governance, data management, data quality. LinkedIn, please come find me.
Cool. And just for our audience, we will get him to Ireland. We will get him to Europe, and we're looking forward to it. I know Malcolm has a soft spot for this part of the world. But yeah, Malcolm, thank you so much. It's absolutely been a fantastic session.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Patty. It's been